Good morning. Welcome to class. Good morning, Michael. You know, I'm not gonna lie. I kind of like Twitch in the sense that I don't really know how many students there are because I don't have a way. My OBS studio doesn't show me how many students or how many people are logged in and watching, which, you know, is so much easier than staring at like 10 people in a classroom. Is there going to be a section in MATLAB Grader for the programming project? Yes, it will show up after the midterm. I've never had students start the project so early, but it'll show up after the midterm. Homework 8. Hold on one second. Homework 8 is on... Homework 8's not on the grader? You guys don't see it? Edit. Visible. Oh, yeah, it'll, I can change that. Maybe? I don't know how to change it. It'll show up on March 24th. It'll show up on Thursday. But it's not going to be able to tell you anything, really. It's just going to be able to tell you if you use the right functions. I don't know how to change that. That's so annoying. Edit. Okay, I got it. We're good. Done. Save. You should be able to see it now. After you refresh the page. And it updates. Okay, do you have any suggestions on how to do homework 7 problem 3? Yeah, homework 7 problem 3 is less complicated than you think it is. Homework 7 problem 3, yeah. It's less complicated than you think it is. Courses, get to the homework. Oh, I have it on my notes. Homework 7. Homework 7? So like I mentioned at the end of lecture last week, you know how to, oh gosh. You would know how to do this, right? You would know how to say I equals h over 3, a plus 4b plus 2c plus d, right? You know how to do that calculation. A is this value here. It's a single number. D is this value here. So single value. B and C are just summations. So anytime you do see a summation, so if I wanted to sum I values where I equals 0 to 10, you think loop. I want to do a loop. For what's your loop control variable? Whatever you want it to be, really. But use the variable that your summation gives you. So for I equals, what's your first value? 0. What's your last value? 10. And anytime we sum a bunch of values in a loop, we're going to initialize. We're going to say sum equals 0 before our loop. And then inside of our loop, we say sum equals sum plus our new term. Don't call your variable sum, though, because sum is a function in MATLAB. So I had s equals 0, s equals s plus I. This does this. What do you mean start with a negative number? The homework wanted us to start with a negative number, so that's where I was confused because it gave me an error. Like down here? No, I and J, so here's I, if I zoom in, I is 2, 4, 6 all the way to M. J is 3, 5, 7 all the way to M minus 1. So I is the even values, and j is the odd values. So that's in your integral down here. That's in your integral down here, your ti to tf. So that's not, so when you use your integration function, I'll answer this and then start talking about the exam. So I equals integral x comma y. This is how you would call your function, right? This is how you would use it in a script file. X is a vector of x values and y is a value of y values. So your y values come from this function here, this big, huge thing. And then your x values would be your t. So here's your x values, where t is a vector from ti to tf with 51 values. So t would be -5 to 5, I believe. Is that what I think that's what you're talking about. I don't see what t is, though. No, it's not. No, it's this to this. I have no idea where it says -5 to 5. But note, these are index values. These are index values. I don't know where it says -5 to 5. But that's how we would use it. So this I here will be this integral, where x contains your t values, and then y contains your y values from that function. Okay, I am going to start class now. So welcome to today. Today I am going to go over some midterm practice problems that I came up with this morning. The practice midterm is not posted. Is there. Week 8 material is there. I'm not going to go over any problems in today because I just created a bunch of videos. It's 35 minutes of videos. It goes through some examples. It's just plotting. Plotting is not going to be on the exam. I still encourage you to finish up all the MATLAB material before the exam so you can just be done with it. So you can just be done with it. Yes, so all that material is there. Use it as you will. Today I am going to start going through problems for the exam. Like I said, I came up with these this morning, so they're not fully fleshed out, but I just wanted to go use them as an illustration for what we are going to, or the material you should more or less know. I'm going to go over more of the array indexing and using arrays. I'm going to have one problem on loops, but I will do more problems on Wednesday. So that should be, there will be more problems. I will also have the practice exam posted. I will have video solutions and solutions posted for that as well. So you should have lots of material that you can go over. Okay, so first things first. This problem says write a function c equals alternate a, b, where a and b are two vectors of the same length. The function must return a vector c, which is a vector of all the elements of a and b alternating. No branching structure or looping structures are required. So on your exam, if you're not told to do it a specific way, you can legitimately do it any way that you want. Here it just says no branching structure or looping structure are required. It does not say you can't use one. It just says they're not required. So there should be an easier way to do this problem. When you are given a problem, specifically a function, I encourage you guys to come up with some sort of example. For your exam, some examples will be given to you. For most problems, you'll have an example. So it'll look something like this. It'll say, what are your A values? What are your B values? So let's say A has 5 values, B has 5 values. C would be the length of A plus B, where A is here, 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 and here, and then B is every other one. So you're alternating numbers. This is similar to what you may have seen in your challenge activities. Okay, but I want to write a function that does this process for me, assuming that A and B are vectors of the same length. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start. So I know that I need to write a function. So whenever you're writing functions, say function c equals alternate a, b, end. When you write a function, it's going to be more or less giving you what it should look like at the top. So go ahead, just write that in. No, you need the keyword function and then just save your file right away. So save it. When you're saving a function, it needs to be the same name as the function. So if my function is called alternate, my file name is called alternate. On your exam, you are not required to have comments at all. So you don't need to have the H1 line comment or the use case inputs outputs comments in your function. So don't do that. It'll just waste time because you're not going to be graded on that. So don't worry about that for the exam. You can use comments to give some sort of indicator of what your code is supposed to do. So let's say you know the steps of what you need to do. So first thing, A and B, I want to figure out how big A and B are. So I'm going to say the length of A is length of A. You have two options to figure out the size of something. When you're using a vector, use the length. The length will tell you how many elements there are in a vector. A and B are vectors, so I'm going to use the length function. If you have an array, I encourage you to use the size function. Okay, but use whichever function makes sense. In this instance, if I want to figure out how many elements there are in A, I'm going to use the length function because A is a vector. Length B. This is one of the ways to do it. There's more than one way. I'm just piecing it together. So first things first, find the number of elements in A and B. Once again, you do not need comments, but they might be useful if you're stuck and you're trying to figure out what your code should do, even if it's not doing what you want it to do. So add a comment so that the grader knows, so that we know that this is what you were trying to do. Okay, even if your code doesn't work, you're still going to get partial credit. It's not going to be the same partial credit that you get for your homeworks. It's not a third of the points. It'll be graded line by line. Okay, so first things first, find the length of A and B. I know C is going to be as big as A plus B are. So C, I'm going to initialize it to a bunch of zeros, where there's one row, and then the length of A plus the length of B columns. Okay, so 0. So let's say A looks like this, 9, 10, 2, 10, 7. That was my example. B looks like this, 2, 10, 10, 5, 9. Then that means that C starts out as a bunch of zeros, which we can see it's 2 times the length of A or 2 times the length of B. Okay, so now I want to go ahead and change C. So I go back to my example, and I'm going to do it in terms of my example, and then I'll change it. So I know that I want this location, this location, this location, this location, and this location, all to contain my values of A. So I've got my left-hand side and my right-hand side. My left-hand side, what do I want to change? I want to change locations 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. What do I want to change it to? The values of A. Start there. I can see that now 9, 10, 2, 10, and 7 are placed in their appropriate location. Now you can start to change it. Okay, so 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9, that's for this example. What if it was any example? Maybe 1, 2, 9 would also work. I could say 1 to end. This would work for all examples. If A was 3, a length of 3, if A was a length of 20. So start to change it. What does it look like if A isn't a length of 5? What if A is a length of 6? What if it's 7, 8? Now my B values. So here, 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 and here. So in C, locations 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. I want to change it to B. Okay, so this works for this example. What if I changed it? So 2 to 10. What if it's not 10 though? I can change it to end. So start with one example and build yourself up. And what if, does it work for this one example? Okay. How would it change if A and B changed? Okay. Once you've modified it, then go ahead and test it in different ways. So see alternate 1 to 7, 7, -1, 1. Change it, see if it works. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 came from this first vector. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 came from the second vector. So I can see that it now changes if my length is 7. You shouldn't need to test it with too many examples, maybe total of 4, depending on whether or not you have branching statements, or 5, depending on how many choices you have. But for an example like this, you shouldn't need to change it that much. A and B are vectors, so just check with different length of vectors. Another thing to point out with functions, when it comes to functions, notice A and B are my function inputs. They only appear on my right-hand side. Nowhere did I say A equals or B equals. So we're never going to reassign our function inputs, because then it would completely ignore whatever our user input. Okay? So we're not going to say A equals or B equals. We're just going to use them as if we already know what they look like, as if we already know that A contains these numbers and B contains these numbers. But we do need to assign C. So somewhere I do need to say C equals. It doesn't matter how often I change it, but somewhere I need to say C equals. Okay, so there's our first example. Let's move on. Okay, so let's CLC. Also, it's a really good idea to clear your workspace after every time you're done writing a function or a file, just to make sure that you're not accidentally using the same variables that already exist. So just clear your workspace so you're starting with a fresh slate every time you write a new file. Okay, so it says write a function B equals divide A, row 1, row 2, where A is a matrix of arbitrary size, and row 1 and row 2 are two indices of rows in A. Okay, so once again, writing a function. So function B equals divide A, row 1, row 2, end. So start your function, save your file. Save your file. Same name as my function. Function name divide, file name divide. Okay, A is a matrix of arbitrary size, so it can be any size, so n by n. And then row 1 and row 2 are two indices of rows, so it tells you either row 1, row 2, row 3, all the way to row m. So that means it's the entire row. It's not a single number, it's the entire row. The function must return a matrix B such that B contains the elements of A, where the row 2 values are divided by the row 1 values. Okay, so like I said, I wrote this morning, so it's not fully vetted, which you guys have at least once vetted, because I did it this morning with the earlier class. So you guys get the privilege of at least seeing some corrected mistakes. Once again, start with an example. If this is what A looks like. A looks like 2, 8, 1, 7, whatever, it's full of random numbers. Let's say row 1 equals 2 and row 2 equals 1. So I'm going to take row 2 numbers and divide them by row 1 numbers. So I'm going to take in this instance, row 1 divided by row 2. So here's my final answer. So these stay the same, where row 1 is just divided by row 2. Sorry. This is my answer. So it's row 1 divided by row 2. These ones stay the same. This is the only one that's changed. So it's the value stored in row 2 divided by the value stored in row 1. And by value, I mean the index. So whatever row 2 is divided by whatever row 1 is. Like I said, this one's not fully vetted. The language is not perfect. It's not my favorite, but it's an example. Okay, so first things first, I'm going to say B equals A, because I know that B is going to contain the values of A, but modified. So before I even begin, I'm going to say B equals A. At least I'm starting there. Now I'm going to take the values in row 1 and divide them by the values in row 2. So I'm going to do what my example is telling me to do. Example states that row 1 equals 2, row 2 equals 1. So B, my row 1, is going to be B, row 1, divided by B, row 2. Remember this notation. B or A is an array now. So rather than a single number that I can use for a vector, I need two numbers. If I'm talking about an entire row, it looks like this. What row? All of my columns. If I was talking about an entire column, it would say colon, comma, whatever my column is. As a note, when you guys are putting together like a cheat sheet or something that you guys can have on handy at your exam that might be a little more succinct than just having things in different locations, write down what code looks like for different examples. So if you want to take note of accessing a single row, say that it's a row colon. So identifying what does your code look like, what does it do? If you want to do a single column, say A colon C. So what does the code look like? What does it do? So rather than just saying, you know, A, R, comma, C, state whatever rows, state whatever columns, start thinking about in terms of how do I do certain things? Are we assuming the rows taken from A are 1? Yes. So Sophia, I'm still building it up. I'm just pausing to take a note of write down what does it sound like in common language, and what does that code look like? So write down on your sheet if you want to change a single row, what does it look like? If you want to change a single column, what does it look like? Okay, so back to our example. So this essentially identifies what our example does. It takes row 1 and it divides it by row 2. So now instead of saying 1 and 2, I want to replace that with my inputs, whatever row 1 and row 2 are. So I know that row 1 was equal to 2. So wherever I used a 2 in here, I can just replace it with a row 1. And I know row 2 was equal to 1. So wherever there's 1, I can replace it with row 2. So now here would be my generic example. So replacing my example values with whatever my variables are. So in theory, we should be done. Let's go ahead and test it. So let's say A looks like this. Rand I mean, you can make A whatever you want. Say A is a 3 by 4. So B equals divide A, comma, let's say row 3 and row 2. So there we go. There's my answer. So it took row 2, replaced it with row 2 divided by row 3. If you ever want to look at what it is with fractions, just say format rat. And you can see your fractions. Once again, make sure it matches your intuition, which weirdly enough, this does not match my intuition. 3, 2. Take row 2 divided by row 3. It should be 3 divided by 5, 6 divided by 6, 5 divided by 7, 4 divided by 4, right? Why did I be 17? Ah, thank you. I forgot the period. Once again, make sure it matches your intuition. Weirdly enough, last time I did this, it gave me a single number, and so that indicated that there was something wrong. Oh, it did give me a single number. It did. It gave me the same number repeated in every single location. I remember because I did this. I highlighted and I right-clicked and checked to see what it was. Okay, so if you ever run into a situation where you can't figure out what's going on, then go through line by line what's happening. Let's say A looked like that. Let's say row 1 is equal to 3. Row 2 is equal to 2. And then just highlight. Say B equals A. See what this is. Okay, what's going on? Okay, I forgot. Let's say I forgot my period. Highlight it and say, oh, that gives me a single number. I don't want a single number. That indicates that, once again, I forgot my period. So if I do that, it went in, and now I get all of those numbers. So sometimes you just do something and you're like, okay, I don't have any more time to keep going, and that's fine. If you forget the period, you're really not gonna lose that many points, maybe like 1. It's a simple fix. So if you legitimately don't have time, move on. If you do have time, go through all of those debugging techniques. Highlight, okay, what would A be? What would row 1 be? What would row 2 be? Highlight, right-click, evaluate selection, see what's happening inside of your code. Okay, so now, thank you, Mitchell. There we go, now it matches. So 3 divided by 5, 6 divided by 6, 5 divided by 7, and 4 divided by 4. Okay, there we go, now that matches. There's gonna be 6 or 8. We're finalizing it this afternoon. I will have all of that information on how to access it, what everything looks like on Saturday. I will have all of that by Wednesday. Sorry. Okay, so here's another example. You could also do this in a loop. That's completely fine. But once again, if you're not required to do it a specific way, avoid loops. Do it in the way that you know. But a loop would also work. So you can also use the debugger. The thing is with functions, it's a little harder. For functions, you could run it line by line by putting your debugger in, breakpoints in with the circles that I always show you guys. And that's completely fine. But for functions, you can't just run your script. You would have to comment out this line and comment out this line and identify what A, B, and C are anyway. So a lot of times when I'm debugging a function, I type out what my inputs would be in my workspace, and then I just highlight line by line and say, hey, evaluate selection, see what happens. Okay, let's move on to another one. This is a fun one. So this one's a little more complicated than what you might see in your exam. I just wanted it to be a little more thorough and look at lots of different options. But okay, so this one says, write a script file called categories.m. Okay, I can do that. New script file, save, call it categories.m. Woo! Finish line, step 1. That prompts the user for an array of values. Okay, prompts the user. Prompts the user. Anytime you see prompts, you need to use input. For your exam, you might be told what the prompt should be. You might not be told what the prompt should be. If you're not told, just make it up. So A equals input array of values. Doesn't need to be complicated. Array of values. Okay, input. So anytime you see the word prompt, means input. Note that on your document. So prompt means use the input function. Once again, there are 2 options when we use the input function. Here's our first option. We just say array, whatever our prompt is. We do this if we're expecting numbers. If we are expecting text, we put in our S. So make sure you're using the appropriate one. I'm expecting numbers, an array of numbers. So I'm going to use that first one. The script file must then determine the types of numbers that are contained in the array by determining the values in the array that are, and then I have lots of different options. Positive numbers, negative numbers, even numbers, odd numbers, prime numbers, integer numbers, and non-integer numbers. Like I said, this is a little more extensive than what you might see on your exam. I just wanted to be thorough and show you all these different examples. So this is array or logical indexing. My positive numbers are going to be the ones in A where A is greater than or equal to 0. This is our logical indexing that we did in last homework. Where A, grab the values in A, where A is greater than or equal to 0. I could do this in 2 steps, where L equals A greater than or equal to 0. This will give me a logical array. Let's say A looks like this. Random numbers from -10 to 20. Let's do 15 numbers. Yeah. So here's A. A looks like this. So L equals A greater than or equal to 0 is going to be 1s and 0s. 1 wherever it's greater than or equal to 0, 0 wherever it's not. If I wanted to do this in 2 steps, I would say AL. Well, this would give me all of the locations where there's a 1. So it grabs the first number, third, 4, 5, 8, 9, 11, 13, 14, 15. Or I can do it in 1 step. Do whichever one makes sense. One is not more correct than the other. Here is where you might add in a comment that might say positive numbers, to indicate to the grader that this is what you're trying to do. Once again, not necessary. If you want to find your negative numbers, negative A, where A less than 0. So once again, on your sheet over to the side, you might say, find negative numbers. This is how you would do it. A less than 0. Okay. This one might make sense to you. Positive and negative makes sense. Relatively straightforward. We've been working with positive numbers in our lifetime for a while. Not forever. We work with positive numbers since we're toddlers, but negative numbers, not quite, but this makes sense. Even numbers. So even numbers. There's a couple ways that you can figure out if a number is even. You could say something like this. You could divide all your numbers by 2, round that, and check to see if it's equal to A divided by 2. So round A divided by 2 looks like this. A divided by 2 looks like this. So the ones where the rounded version is equal, like 10 is equal to 10, 9 is equal to 9. Wherever they're equal, it should match. Yeah, that'll be even. This is one way to do it. Something went wrong there. Another way to do it is using what's called the mod function. So mod essentially finds the remainder. It's going to take A, divide everything by 2, and check to see if there's any remainders. So when we say mod A comma 2, it gives me the remainder. So this first number, the remainder is 0. The second number, the remainder is 1, then 0, 0, 1, 1, etc. So anytime it's equal to 0, that means it's an even number. So on your document, you might say even numbers. You would do this. Mod A comma 2 equal 1. Equal 0, sorry. So once again, on your document, start thinking about how you do things with code versus just notes about what code does. So how do you find even numbers? You check to see if mod A comma 2 equals 0. So now that checks even numbers. Odd numbers is the same process. A comma 2, but now you're checking to see if it's 1. So anywhere there's a 0, that's even. Anywhere there's a 1, that's odd. So here are my odd numbers. And then I have prime numbers. So a prime number, there's a function in MATLAB called isPrime. you have access to MATLAB help. Like you in order to use MATLAB, you need the internet, so you can Google things. I mean, you can't ask someone to be like, hey, if I post this problem for you, would you solve it for me? But like, in order to use MATLAB help, you need the internet. So you can just Google things. You can say, how do I find if a number is prime? I would encourage you guys to do that as least as possible. Use it as a last resort. Go based off of your knowledge first, because there's going to be so many problems to do. You don't have a lot of time to spend on each problem, so maybe about 10 minutes each problem. So do that as a last resort, which is why I said, you know, write this stuff out. So if you want to do a certain thing, what does it look like? So for prime numbers, there's a function called isPrime, where you would say it only works for positive numbers and whole numbers. So A is prime. I would need to round them, and absolute value. Obviously, you should only use isPrime for whole numbers, but I don't have just whole numbers. I also have absolute values, so I'm just going to round them. But you don't need to just have a conditional in there. Sometimes our conditionals are with a function isPrime. But here, same thing. Yes, I did mean that. I have one more parenthesis that's missing. Same thing. It's going to give me a logical of a 0 wherever it's not prime, and a 1 wherever the rounded absolute value version is prime. So my conditional isn't necessarily just a comparison. It uses a MATLAB function. And then integer numbers. So there's a couple ways to figure out an integer number. One of the ways is to just round A and check to see if it's equal to the original value of A. Same way I did initially for even. But here I can check to see if they're integers. There is a MATLAB function called isInteger that is not checked to see if it's an integer. Okay? So keep that in mind. So if you just round A and check to see if it's the original value of A, it's an integer. And then non-integers. Same thing, except rather than checking to see if it is equal, you say not equal. So here are 7 different checks, 7 different ways where we can extract numbers from A. Extract the positive numbers, extract the negative numbers, extract the even numbers, odd numbers, prime numbers, integers, non-integers. Like I said, this is a little bit more than what you might see on the exam. I just wanted to go through lots of different options. Okay, so mod is used to check to see if a number is evenly divisible by 2. Here it checks to see if it's an odd number. Okay. I didn't know that. So if I don't want to use this function, then it doesn't matter. I could also just change it to capital int. I could say integers. But yeah, in general, you don't want to name your variables the same as other MATLAB functions. I don't want to use this int function in my script file, so it's not that big of a deal if I name it int. But that's a good point. Okay, so the last part of this question is display the results in the following format. Okay, whew, here we go. If you're not told to use a specific fprintf or disp, use whichever one you want. For this, if I wanted to use fprintf, it would look like this. fprintf, positive numbers, and then I would have to print out my positive numbers with a second line, just like you did for that one homework. %d, space, and then the array, so pos. And then fprintf, \n. And this is what it would look like if I was using fprintf. Once again, if you're not told which one to use whichever one you want. I can copy and paste this and do negative numbers. If you're using disp, it would look like this. Disp, I'm going to combine text with numbers, so I need my open close brackets. I'm going to combine the text even numbers. Come on. And then num to string even. So it's going to convert this entire array to a string. It's not the best formatted, but once again, if you're not told specifically, then just print out however. If you're not told which number of digits past the decimal point, then don't worry about that. I'm gonna go ahead and copy, paste this down. Yes, this is done in one line. With fprintf, you cannot do it in one line. Not if you want to print all the values together. Like, if you don't know how many values there are, it needs to be done on a separate line because of the way that you need to print out that entire array. You can't say positive numbers, %d, pos, because it's going to repeat this entire text until it runs out of numbers. And you don't want to repeat that entire text, you just want to repeat this text. Odd numbers, prime numbers, which isn't technically going to be correct. But I rounded values, and then integer numbers, and non-integer numbers. Okay, so now let's run our code, and now we test it. I mean, you can test it as you go along, but test it at least when you're done. So what did A look like? Here we go. Okay, so I ran up with an error. That's totally fine. Dimensions of arrays being concatenated are not consistent. So it looks like my values are columns instead of arrays. So I'm going to, or columns instead of rows. So I'm going to transpose them. There we go. So here are all my positive numbers. Here are all my negative numbers. Here's my even numbers, my odd numbers. Here's my prime numbers. Here's my integer numbers. And notice I don't have any non-integer numbers because A looks like this. They're all integers. Okay. If I took A and divided it by 2, then now I have different answers. So here's my positive numbers, negative numbers, even numbers, odd numbers, prime numbers, integer numbers, and non-integer numbers. Notice I use disp to print out some of this stuff, so it doesn't, I don't have control over how that prints out. For the fprintf, if it used %d and I expect a floating point number like this, then maybe I should print out my numbers to 1 digit past the decimal place. It's up to you on how you want things printed out, unless you are explicitly told what it should look like. So here I use num to string. Use num to string when you are combining text and numbers and variables in disp. So I can't just say num to string even, because here it'll give me these empty blocks because even isn't text. So it does its best to convert it to text, but it's not. I can't combine text and numbers. I need to convert my numbers to a string first, and then it will take this text and place it next to my numbers converted to a text. Okay, so that's when you would use num to string. String compare is when you are comparing. So it's strcmp, there's no O. String compare is when you are creating a logical, or when you're doing some sort of comparison in order to get a logical. Typically, you would use this if you're comparing an input value to an option. Or in our class, we focus a little bit more heavily on numbers and not necessarily text. So there's not very good examples. But essentially, you're comparing text to text. So string compare, it's comparing two strings for equality. It's checking to see, is string 1 equal to string 2? Yeah, but you can't do this with single quote strings. Okay, that's that example. Let's go over this last example. This last example has a lot in it. It covers everything. Can those first, no, you cannot do this all in one. Let me show you what happens if you try. %d space, \n. Let's say I combine them all here. If I did this, it will print them all out like this, where it prints out the first number. It legitimately repeats this text over and over and over again, inserting the next number of pos until it runs out of numbers in pos. So pos looks like this. Pos contains these numbers. So it's going to say positive number 3, positive number 7.5, positive number 7.5, positive number 6, positive number 5, 3, 10, 5. It repeats that text over and over and over again, inserting each number one at a time until it runs out. So you need to do this in 3. Remember, fprintf prints out everything character by character. So it prints out a POSTIVE space numbers colon space. It's not going to do the new line. Display doesn't do line. So if I wanted to get rid of this, note I'm printing on a floating point number using the integer. I would say 0.1f. I would change it from a D to an F. Some functions are designed to return logical values. Yes. So the prime function is designed to return a true or a false. String compare is designed to return a true or a false. A logical true or a logical false. A logical 1 or a logical 0. Is prime, string compare, both of those are examples. There's others. Help, string compare. If you do help on a function, it should tell you, here it says it returns a logical 1 or returns a logical 0. Same thing you do is prime. Is 1 for the elements, 0 otherwise. It's a little less, like, I imagine this documentation hasn't been fully updated with later versions of MATLAB, but same thing. Is 1 true if they are prime, 0 if not. So when printing an array with fprintf, the only thing that can be in the format specifier is the form. No. So this is just the way you would do it if you wanted to print an array as a row. This is not how you would do it every single time. This is just what I use to print it out in this way. It's not working here because I have a row instead of a column. But this is what it looks like if I wanted to print it out like this. If I wanted to print it out in a table, then that's different. So this is just an example of how to print it out this way. It's not what you should use for everything. Okay, I do want to get to really good points. I do want to get to this last example. So it says write a script file, remove invalid data. Okay, I can do that. Script file, remove invalid data.m. Yay, I did that at least. Okay, that reads in a file of data from data.txt. So data.txt is in my current folder. So I'm going to load that in. Load data.txt. If I run this, data shows up in my workspace. So I can double click that, I can print it out. So here's what data looks like. So notice there's these NaN locations, these NaN values. Okay, so in my text it says your script file must remove all of the rows of data that contain invalid data or data that is NaN, not a number. Okay, so first thing I want to do is I want to check to see if a row contains a not a number value. You could do this. You could do this with logical indexing, and that's fine. I'm going to do it with a loop. So I am going to iterate over all of the rows of data and check each row independently if it contains a number, if it contains an NaN. So first things first, I want to figure out how many rows data has. So data is an array, so I'm going to use the size function. Size of data, comma 1. So here, grab the number of rows. So grab the size of the data along the first dimension, the number of rows. And then I'm going to iterate over all the rows. For I equals 1 to r. So I is going to be row 1, then row 2, then row 3, then row 4, all the way down to row 20. So for each row, I want to check to see if it contains not a number. So essentially, I'm asking if it's invalid, and that's going to happen if my row, so data row I, all columns, equals NaN. So MATLAB's going to give me this warning here that I learned this morning. It says use is NaN when comparing values to NaN. So rather than saying is equal to NaN, I'm going to say is NaN. I'm going to use my MATLAB recommendation. Okay, so I'm going to run my code and see what happens. So I'm going to start small and build it up. So here are all of my answers. So here's my answer for row 1, row 2, row 3, row 4, row 5, row 6, row 7, row 8. So somehow I need to use this data in order to determine if each row contains an NaN. So row 1 does contain an NaN, row 2 does not. The difference between these two arrays is this one has a 1 and this one does not. I can't just say if invalid equals 1. I can't just say that. I can't compare I can't use if on an array. Invalid is an array. So I need to somehow convert that array into a single number. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to grab the sum of it. Remember, the sum is a way of counting however many elements equal something. So I'm going to check if the sum is greater than 0. If the sum of this array is greater than 0, that means that row contains an invalid number. So this is the same as saying data I equals NaN. MATLAB doesn't like this notation for some obscure reason. It doesn't give us the right answers. It tells us to use the isNaN function. Just like isPrime, same thing. So here I'm checking to see if the sum of invalid, count how many invalid values there are. If that's greater than 0, now I'm going to keep track of which rows those are. There's a couple ways to do that. Yes, isNaN is a built-in MATLAB function. So if we hit Michael, could you read? Okay, if we put is before a thing. No, not necessarily. This is a built-in MATLAB function. You can always check. So help is NaN is correct. You could, so like I said, there is an is integer function. But, there we go, if I spelled it correctly. But this is not the same as checking if a number is whole. Okay, this is different. So you have to keep track of what you're trying to do. So MATLAB told us to use this function, so we're gonna use it. If you don't, like your exam will give you an indicator of using a function or not using a function if you've never seen it before. Yes, so AP Cruzy, so just the fact that this contains a number of rows, so I equals 1 to rows, 1 to R. So that means automatically I is going to be 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, then 6, then 7, then 8, then 9, then 10, all the way down to 20. Okay, so now I need to keep track of which rows contain an invalid value. So if row contains an invalid value, this is where comments might help. If you really don't know what to do, try something. Insert comments that tells us that you at least know what you're trying to do, even if it's not working correctly. So I know I'm trying to check if a row contains an invalid value, even if it's not working correctly. Okay, so we are out of time. I'm gonna go ahead and finish this quickly, and then we'll end. Okay, so I need to keep track of which rows these invalid values are in. So there's a couple ways I can do this. I can start out with invalid rows as an empty array. And then I can say invalid rows equals invalid rows plus my new I value. So this will keep track of all of the number of invalid rows. So here's what that looks like. First it's 1, then it's 1 and 4. So it takes this 1 here and adds the 4. Then it takes the 1, 4 and adds the 6. Then it takes the 1, 4, 6 and adds the 7. Then adds the 12, then the 14, then the 15, then 19 and 20. So this is one way to do it. So note, this example goes through pretty much everything we've learned. It goes through script files, it goes through loading, it goes through array modification, concatenation, it goes through size, it goes through for loops, if statements. There's a lot in here. But here I keep track of the invalid rows, and then I can go ahead and delete those rows. So I say data. Which rows am I going to delete? The ones in invalid. All of them equals open close brackets. So here I delete them. So there we go. So this is my data with all of the removed or the invalid rows removed. So this is what it looked like initially. Nope. This is what it looked like initially. Here we go. This is what it looked like initially. And this is with all the rows removed. And so there's a lot in here. There's not much code, but there's a lot going on in a problem like this. This problem, once again, it might be a little more complicated, but I wanted to use it as an illustration to look at all of the pieces and how we might approach a problem. The last thing is to save my data. So save, what do I want to save it as? Valid data.txt. What's the variable name, data, and then I want it to be an ASCII file because it's .txt. So now valid data contains all of my valid rows. So there's a lot going on here. If you understand most of what happens here, that's a good thing. If you need a little bit more time to chunk through this material, that's also fine. Just try and keep track of what's happening in each location. This is more complicated. This invalid rows thing is more complicated. This is one way to do it. It's not the only way you can do it. It's only one of the ways. A lot of these problems can be solved in multiple ways. You're not going to be told explicitly how you have to do something. You might be told you have to use loops. You might be hinted, hey, maybe you should use this function. But if you can find a way to do it differently, unless you're told explicitly what to do, that's fine. Figure out which way you know how to do it. Maybe go through this problem yourself and figure out how to do this differently. What way did you come up with in your brain? Okay, so we're going to stop there. Like I said, the practice exam will be posted later today. With solutions and video solutions showing me going through my thought process and how to solve the problems. And you'll have lots of material to go through. Don't forget, finish your homework, go to office hours. And yeah, I'll see you guys on Wednesday, where we will go over more problems. So AP, it really depends. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. If you really just want to do something 5 times, you might just say for I equals 1 to 5. But a lot of times you do use it, but it's not always a guarantee. It really just depends on what you're trying to do. Okay, see you guys on Wednesday.